What is up, everybody? Welcome back to the Blue Star Lunch Hour. I am Joey Ikes. This is John Owning, and we're going to do a fun exercise today, John. We're going to do the classic way too early 53-man roster prediction. And this exercise has gotten significantly more complicated the last few years as the NFL has, should we say, made their roster mechanisms much more flexible than they had been in years past.
100%, and I think the funnest thing about a 53-man roster projection is it helps us really identify the areas where the Cowboys are still thin, where they have good depth, where the biggest decisions are going to be made, where some training camp battles are going to take place. So I think it's a really fun exercise to do this early out in the offseason still.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's one of those things that, we could probably go through right now and name, and we will probably get 46, 48 of the 53-ish, I say ish because there's a lot of wiggle in these rules now.
Obviously, injuries is the only thing that can make like a big shakeup at this point, besides a crazy trade or free agency acquisition.
Yeah, absolutely. And so because of that, this exercise is really valuable in I'm trying to think of the margins of the roster. That's the word that I'm hunting for. Sorry. Where we wind up with these players in the back end of the roster that we're going to wind up having a lot of conversation about. And these exercises are funny to me because we will spend more time between now and, about this time in the month of September, right before week 1, talking about the 51st, 52nd, and 53rd player on the roster that by week 3, we won't have said their name in 3 weeks because they won't be active. They won't be on the roster. They may have gotten dropped or pulled up from the practice squad a couple times. But for the next 4 months, these decisions feel like vital. Like they feel like if you make a mistake, and I'm guilty of this. I'm sure you're guilty of this with guys also, where if they cut this guy, he's not going to make it back to the practice squad. And if he doesn't make it to the practice squad, they're going to regret it in 3 years. And 2 years later, the guy's out of the league.
Isaiah Land fiasco. Of a couple
Isaiah Land, we went through it with I can't even remember his name now. The tight end they drafted from Baylor a few years ago where, he catches 2 or 3 touchdowns in the preseason. And we're like, hey, this guy's got something here. We need to hold on to this guy. He's going to get pulled off the practice, like all this kind of stuff. And, guys out of the league a couple of years later because he doesn't love football, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think we make a lot of these bottom of the roster conversations, but they're valuable because every once in a while, right? Every once in a while there's a Cole Beasley. Every once in a while there's a Miles Austin. Every once in a while there's a Rico Dowdle that is, the last guy on the roster. And then the next season he's running back 2. And then now he's like, he's basically one of the 2 or 3 guys that's going to be part of the true committee that we think we're looking at here in this backfield. Mm-hmm. So we're going to do a 53-man roster. And we're going to get into it. I've got Excel pulled up here. I'm a big Excel nerd, so I live in this stuff a lot. But so I think this position maybe it's really easy. Maybe it's not. I think the first guy on the list is pretty easy here, where we've got Dak Prescott, and they just picked up a roster bonus for Trey Lance, so I'm going to assume he's on the roster. Mm-hmm. Do we automatically assume that Cooper Rush is on the roster, or do we think there's a chance they only carry 2 quarterbacks? I know, and the rules that are really tough for me to keep track of as we go through this and as they make these changes. The rules that are really tough for me to keep track of are the rules like with the 3rd quarterback. And does he count on the 53-man roster? Does he not count on the 53-man roster? Do they get to keep 54 if they keep a 3rd? Like these sorts of things are always tricky for me. Do you know the specifics on the 3rd quarterback situation? I know on the 46, like he can dress as the 47th man, but he can't play unless both of the other quarterbacks are dressed. But I don't know, and shout out to the Excel nerds out there, Fisher Kid, Appreciate it.
Man.
If I don't know if that guy counts on the 53 or not, but do you think they keep Cooper Rush as kind of that safe backup quarterback, or do they just kind of lean into this thing and say, you know what, if Dak gets hurt, Trey Lance is our guy?
I think what their hope in their mind, what the ideal route for Cooper Rush is that they do what a lot of teams do and try to sneak him onto the practice squad to kind of be that veteran backup QB that's on the practice squad now that they have those veteran exceptions on the practice squad now.
Yeah,
So
that
that would
really
be ideal. The ideal route for him roster wise is to be off the 53, but on the practice squad would be my belief.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. And I also think that, we got to point out, we talked about rollover cap space earlier in the week being kind of a game changer in the cap calculation and cap working mechanisms. The rules that came into effect put the whenever they put the rules for the pandemic in to add the ability to move guys on and off the practice squad and increase the size of the practice squad and all that kind of stuff. When they did that and then kept it, it really changed the game on this kind of stuff because now, like you said, that option of keeping Cooper Rush on a practice squad and bringing him up 3 times at the beginning of the year as your backup quarterback or as your emergency quarterback, without him costing a roster spot on game day, and also without him costing you a roster spot the first few weeks of the year when you mentioned injury earlier. Injury always plays a huge factor into this. Usually, if you can wait 3 or 4 weeks, the injury thing will work itself out, and somebody's going to wind up on IR, especially with the reserve rules and being able to come back from it now. So I think you're probably right. Let's go with 2 quarterbacks and see how it works out from a construction standpoint, and we'll see how it works out, and if we need to add that guy back or if we decide to leave it alone.
Love it.
All right, so at running back, I'm going to go ahead and put Ezekiel Elliott here.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think it's a sure thing that Zeke makes the roster this year?
I would say it's like a 80% sure type thing. Like
Yeah, I think you're
still a good, like a decent odds that he doesn't make the team because, just physical deterioration, doesn't have the explosiveness. Maybe he's really outperformed by Royce Freeman, those type of things. So I would say because of his familiarity with the team, with the locker room, the leadership and all of that, and plus the fact that he's not completely washed, that he has a very good shot to make the roster, but there's still a chance that he doesn't, things can happen.
Yeah, I agree with that for sure. I think that there is a well-defined enough role for Zeke in an offense like this that I think that he's pretty clearly going to make the roster. Let me ask you this. How many running backs do we think they keep?
This is the hard part because I think kind of meshing running back and tight end, like, do you want to go 4 tight ends or do you want to go a little bit longer at running back? I could see arguments for both positions, especially with the new special teams kind of changes to the kickoff rules about how that kind of changes the players you're looking at and the value of those special teamers as well. So I could see it honestly going either way between those two. Either they go long at running back or long at tight end.
Yeah, I generally think I agree with you. So I think it really kind of comes down to, you talked about special teams. I'm going to add a space here in the middle for whoever we think is running back 2, and I'm going to add Hunter Lepke's name here.
Ooh.
And I'm going to add it there for special teams. And the reason why is because I went and looked. I don't know what it is. It's a sort of a pet peeve for me when people talk about like down roster wide receivers and down roster running backs and things like that. And do they contribute on special teams, et cetera? And I went back and looked, and I've done this before, but I like to verify it every year. The only 2 offensive players who weren't tight ends who played more than like 50 special team snaps last year were Hunter Lepke and Jalen Tolbert. And Jalen Tolbert was a gunner on the punt team, which is, sometimes that's a corner, sometimes that's a wide receiver, but that is not a role that is like, he didn't play. It's not a role that has to be stuck out there all the time for those guys to leave. It doesn't always have to be an offensive player. So basically, there doesn't have to be a ton of offensive players that play special teams, but Hunter Lepke is a guy who plays special teams. I think he fits really well with the new kickoff rules, body type wise, all that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And he's one of their better ball carriers, was a good receiver out of the backfield as a rookie. Like, I think there's a really, really good shot that he makes the 53 and does it on the back of his wide variety of available roles.
Yeah, I think that versatility really plays to his ability to make the roster. The ability to block in line, to be able to block in from the backfield, to be able to block and sift and from movement and stuff like that. The ability on special teams, the ability to receive the ball in the backfield, to carry the ball. He just is able to wear so many hats and do so many different types of things that's a really valuable player when you have a limited number of players available on a limited number of spots available on the roster. A guy that can wear so many hats is super valuable, and we know how much the Cowboys drink the versatility Kool-Aid on a year by year basis. So, it's just hard because then you go spot number 2. You would probably say Rico Dowdle is the running back 2, right?
Yeah, I think so. I was going to ask you if you thought that there was much competition between Rico and Royce Freeman for kind of that other, because I'm kind of thinking that Zeke and this other running back, whether it's Rico, whether it's Royce Freeman, whether it's some other guy, if they don't like what they see out of those two in camp, those two are going to wind up getting the combination for probably 75 or 80% of the carries for the team. Mm-hmm. And then the other 20%, which is not that many carries when you go through an entire, it's 5 or 6 carries a game, will go to like CeeDee Lamb and Dak Prescott and Kevontae Turpin and people like that. So I think that we're probably safe there. Now the next question comes: Is there a chance? This is a hard conversation because it almost comes back to like, is there a chance that Deuce Vaughn doesn't make or makes the roster? Because it almost feels like he showed so much in the preseason last year. It was very easy to pencil him in onto the roster. But do we feel like he's got a chance this year, or was what happened early in the season last year, and then those guys basically getting benched last year and becoming a healthy scratch for most of the season? Do we think that he kind of gets relegated to he's a practice squad guy, training camp hero, and he'll have a career for 2 or 3 years doing that, and then he'll be out of the league once he runs out of that?
I mean, outside of Rico, Deuce Vaughn's the guy that, like, internally I'm like, I hope makes the 53 the most. I just really like Deuce. I love the story. I loved his college tape at Kansas State. So I was like, I hope, but he's kind of the antithesis of Hunter Lepke, whereas Lepke wears so many hats. Deuce Vaughn just doesn't wear enough hats, and he's small. So he has a lot of strikes going against him. And kind of similar to what I said about Cooper Rush, I think Deuce Vaughn is another guy that they're probably hoping they can sneak onto the practice squad. If, say, a Rico Dowdle gets hurt, or Zeke gets hurt, or even if Royce Freeman somehow makes the roster, or they go 4 or high at running back and he's one of them and he gets hurt, he can go on the roster because of his pure running ability. He might be the most talented pure runner still on the Cowboys roster, given, Zeke and Royce, how elevated in age, the loss of explosiveness, all those type of things. So I do think his talent as a runner will give him some value to make it somewhere on the Cowboys roster, where, I mean, in the Cowboys organization, I suppose, on the practice squad, but I just don't see a real definitive pathway to the 53 unless he has to have an unbelievable preseason. Because another problem with training camp is it's just not a good avenue to really judge a running back's ability. You can judge their receiving ability, some things about their blocking ability, but it's just hard to really see their vision and their tackle breaking ability, their ability to play through contact. Those type of really important traits for running backs are hard to discern in a training camp environment.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think that, he's that guy that lives right on the verge that I think you're probably right in that most teams will think that he's too small. Mm-hmm. And so he's probably not going to get claimed off waivers if you cut him in the first week of September.
And plus, you got to remember the family part that plays into it, that he's with his dad.
Yeah.
Teams, they don't care about those type of things if it's going to improve the roster. But with those type of things, they don't like. You just have a mental block to want to take a kid away from his dad type of thing. And
And
Yeah,
the other side of that's true, true too, where unless he gets claimed off waivers, he's probably not leaving the Cowboys to go to another team. Like
mhm.
he just because of if he's got the choice, he's going to stay with dad, going to stay in Dallas, all that kind of stuff. So I think you're probably right in that he winds up being a practice squad guy that maybe gets some elevations. Maybe the kickoff rules becomes really a kind of a career saving thing for him, where it becomes a little bit more of a running back situation because of the decrease in distance that the coverage guys are covering and the way the blocking is going to set up, and it becomes more of a running back type play than a wide receiver play, and that's where kind of his niche skill set fits. Maybe so. If that is, then awesome. The Cowboys have a fantastic asset in that area to go along with Cavante Turpin. But if not, he's a practice squad guy who can come up. He can create and get in the open field, but it's just he's the size struggles, and it just felt like the game was going really fast for him towards the first part of the regular season last year.
Yeah, totally agree. Totally. Couldn't have said it better. But this tight end position that we're moving on to next, this is where there's some interesting decisions lie. RIP, our man, Peyton Hendershot.
Oh yes, yes,
Yeah.
almost certainly. So I think these two guys are, Jake Ferguson, Luke Schoonmaker, tight end 1, tight end 2, pretty straightforward. And then you get into this next group, and John Stevens Jr. is going to be a really interesting conversation because we've seen these guys before who have a great training camp, a great preseason, get hurt, and then the next year just can't match what they did the year before and wind up kind of falling off. I think it was Raymond Radway had that type of offseason a couple
That's
of
a
years
name.
ago.
That's a name. Oh my word.
He got hurt like a minute left in the 4th preseason game, missed the whole season. He was going to make the roster, comes back, and then just gets washed out in the wash.
I haven't heard that name in forever. My word. That's funny. All right. Sorry.
That's one of those it's been 84 years memes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think they paid him a lot of money. I can't remember if it's 1 in or 2, but
It's 2. Perfect.
they paid him a lot of money. I think he's going to make the roster. Brevin Spanford is. I think they're probably pretty likely to carry 4 tight ends, and I think it probably winds up coming down to if John Stevens Jr. plays up to the level that he played last year, it's probably him. If not, then maybe if Peyton Hendershot has one more run at this thing. So I think there's kind of a insert your tight end 4 here. You said RIP Peyton Hendershot. I'm guessing that means you think it's John Stevens, huh?
Yeah, I mean, you can tell, just look at the Jones family's comments throughout the offseason. They bring up John Stevens Jr. without even being asked about him. He's definitely at the forefront of their mind of guys who are going to step in and make a bigger impact this year that weren't available last year. I mean, he gets mentioned with like the Trayvon Diggses of the world and stuff like that. It seems like they really believe that he's going to be able to play a crucial role. And it seemed like last year Hendershot wasn't going to make the roster until John Stevens Jr. got hurt. That's where the rumblings that were coming out of camp, everybody was saying. And I think that's going to be the case this year. Yeah, it's going to be an interesting group. I actually really do like this group of 4. I think Jake Ferguson is an extremely underrated starting tight end. I think he's one of the better ones in the NFL. One of my favorite players on the team. He's someone who competes in every aspect of playing tight end. Schoonmaker, I still think he's underrated. I think obviously the rookie year didn't go as well, but I think the fact that he was dealing with so many injuries early on kind of inhibited his developmental process early in the year. And that's why he kind of had a unnoteworthy rookie year, but I'm really looking forward to what he can do in year 2. Brevin Spanford, I talked to him talked about him a lot last week. Fantastic blocker, can be a mismatch weapon in the red zone. He can be, hopefully they can start developing his receiving traits, so that he can be a little bit more of a route runner, or he can even be just a Dalton Schultz type that's finding spaces in intermediate zone. So that'll be fun. And then John Stevens Jr., I'm just really excited to see him get more run, someone who can be a legitimate pass catcher threat, someone who showed good continuity with Dak Prescott last year in camp. So really excited. We know how Dak Prescott loves to rely on his tight end position. So I could see John Stevens Jr., if he comes back well from the injury, I could see him developing like an actual role on the offense, a bigger role than most, tight end 3 or 4s you would see on most offenses.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right there. I think they're going to keep 4 tight ends for lots of reasons. The big body type is a big part of it. I think they're going to play way more 12 personnel this year than they did last year. I think there's a lot of reasons there. I've kind of got to start on the wide receiver names here. I think these are the sort of safe bets. We had some interesting news come down the pipe yesterday on Wednesday, of course, the day we're not doing a show. The Cowboys bring Zay Jones in for a free agent visit, which is, an interesting development. I don't think it necessarily materially changes the wide receiver depth chart at the top, but it is an interesting name kind of in the middle of that depth chart. But he's now in Kansas City for the day, left Dallas last night. So CeeDee Lamb, Brandon Cooks, Jalen Tolbert, I think that's pretty straightforward, pretty clear.
Mm-hmm.
I also think, and I'm going to check our lads here to make sure I spell it right, because I'm famous for misspelling his name, even though I can say it just fine. But Kevontae Turpin, the AE at the end gets me every time. So it's.
And I definitely think you can go back to the offseason comments from Fossil. He brought up Turpin as someone he's really excited to see with the new return rules or new kickoff rules, that his value as a return man only improves, because in previous years, his basic value was only as a punt returner because kickoffs basically didn't exist. So now you bring in, maybe 2 or 3 more opportunities for him to be able to make a definitive impact on the game. And I definitely think someone like him, as he continues to improve more as a traditional receiver, as a mismatch weapon, as kind of a gadget guy on offense, I think he definitely has a spot on the 53.
Yeah, I think you're right. And then last year, a guy who showed up pretty well towards the end of the season, Jalen Brooks. I'm going to go ahead and pencil him kind of as true wide receiver 4, wide receiver 5, depending on how you count Turpin on the wide receiver depth chart.
Mm-hmm.
Are there any of these? Are there any other wide receivers that you think, at least right now on the depth chart, go above him in terms of where they sit right now?
I don't think any of them sit right now. I'd say the one that has an opportunity, besides obviously Flournoy with his draft capital invested in him, is Jalen Marino Cropper. He's a guy who I was a big fan of his as a UDFA coming out of Fresno State last year. He's kind of local to me down in Fresno in the California area. He's a really good player, slot weapon, someone who can make plays after the catch. I think that another year he's someone who, can be a surprise, someone who's vying for, a wide receiver 4 or 5 gig on the roster. I could see him, every year that seems like there's a receiver early on in camp that really shows well, a young receiver, and I think Marino Cropper could be that guy this year.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I'm penciling Flournoy in after Brooks, just because of the fact that, like you said, the current year draft pick very rarely on this team winds up released off the roster, even if they're going to be a game day inactive for 18 weeks, like Junior Fehoko was last year. That he's probably going to make the team. So that's 6 wide receivers. We went relatively light at running back, but then a little heavier at tight end. So why don't we go through the offensive? I think I'm starting to get the feel that teams are just going to carry just a crap load of wide receivers. And so I think there's a chance they could carry 7, especially like if you think, Turpin's got a little bit of a role on offense, but if 1 or 2 of these guys is going to be, somebody's got to be inactive on game day. It may as well be wide receiver 7 instead of linebacker 6 or something like that, considering the positional value. So I'm going to leave a window there open for us to drop another guy in case we need Cropper when we get to the numbers. Because I do think that's kind of the name. David Durden is an interesting guy too. He got hurt so early last year, we didn't see hardly anything from him. But I do think that it's at least an interesting name to pay attention to. On the offensive line, it feels like this is relatively straightforward. They just spent a 1st-round pick on Tyler Guyton, so I'll put him here. Zach Martin's going to the Hall of Fame, so he probably deserves to be there. Tyler Smith is an All-Pro, so he'll be there. They just spent a third-round pick on Cooper Beebe, so he'll be there. Terrence Steele, they just paid, so he'll be there for at least a year. And that's probably your starting five there in some combination. And then TJ Bass is, probably O-line 6 or interior O-lineman number 4. Chuma Edoga is probably your swing tackle, right, left tackle, maybe even interior backup if you need him. And now we're just 7 offensive linemen. And
Hoffman.
Yeah, I was going to say. And
Laurie's number 1.
We know they love Brock Hoffman, so he'll probably make the team. And now we're at 8 offensive linemen. And then they will probably, because we know how they like to do things, they will almost certainly keep another tackle, whether it's Matt Waletzko, Awesome Richards. I think it's probably out of those 2, back-to-back year 5th-round picks in year 2 and year 3, now sitting here at the bottom of the offensive line roster. Do we think they keep 9? Do we think they keep 10? What's our offensive number look like so far? So we're at 23 on offense right now. I usually think 25, 25, and 3, but we've got some wiggle, I think, here. So do we think they carry 9 offensive linemen? Do we think they carry 10 offensive linemen?
I think this is one of those things where you kind of have to put it as a placeholder right now, and then once we get through the defense, we can kind of circle back and see, the 7th or 6th cornerback versus, a Nathan Thomas or an Awesome Richards or a Matt Waletzko or 2 of those 3. I have a hard time seeing them getting rid of all 3 of those guys, or even 2 of those 3, Awesome Richards, Matt Waletzko, and Nathan Thomas. For just some reason, I have a feeling they would. It's so hard because they've on one hand, they really value the veteran presence of a Chuma Edoga and his ability to fill in at either guard or tackle if, say, a Guyton or Martin get hurt. And then you got the youngsters let's go. I would guess this is probably his nut cutting year time. You have to start showing some ability this year. Awesome Richards, I think he showed some stuff last year that warranted. I don't think you throw him out now. I think he's someone who needs to be on the 53-man roster. And then, like you said, they spent draft capital on Nathan Thomas, and this is a team that does not like to cut players that they put draft capital in that same year. So I definitely think Awesome Richards is someone who's going to make the roster, but outside of that, between Nathan Thomas and Matt Waletzko, I think it's kind of up in the air.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. We're gonna leave Nathan Thomas. We're gonna make him bright yellow there so that we remember that there's maybe it's just him, maybe it's both him and Matt Waletzko, depending on how the numbers go on defense. I think it's probably a smart way to look at it. So we're at 25 offensive players with Dak Prescott, Trey Lance, Ezekiel Elliott, Rico Dowdle, Hunter Lepke, Jake Ferguson, Luke Schoonmaker, Brevin Spann-Ford, John Stevens Jr., CeeDee Lamb, Brandon Cooks, Jalen Tolbert, Kavontae Turpin, Jalen Brooks, Ryan Flournoy, Tyler Guyton, Zach Martin, Tyler Smith, Cooper Beebe, Terrence Steele, TJ Bass, Chuma Edoga, Brock Hoffman, Awesome Richards, and Nathan Thomas. That's our 25 offensive players on our tentative 53-man roster. So as we move to defense, I don't know how you like to do this, John. I like to classify edge and interior defensive line because I think that's probably the way that they divide things and the way that they look at things, or the way they should. I don't know if they do, but the way that they should look at things.
100%. It annoys me when people just start, from a specific team, it's less egregious, but I hate it in draft things or NFL wide or all pro voting, those type of things where they still have a defensive end, outside linebacker. It just creates so much confusion. And you're like, well, TJ Watt's different than Micah Parsons because he has his hand on the ground and the other one doesn't, but it's stupid.
Yep, absolutely. They line up in the same place and their assignment is the same thing.
Yep.
It's the same position. I don't care what you want to call it in your specific system. If you're looking at it from a meta standpoint, he's lined up in the D gap. and he's playing, outside shoulder of the tight end, in the run game. He's playing the same position. So I've got three guys here. We've got to add Marshawn Nealon, the draft pick this year, for another edge. Do we think? Let's look at our lads and see how they have it ordered here.
Fehoko,
do we think this is kind of where I was getting? Do we think Fehoko is for sure an edge? Do we think he's for sure an outside player, or do we think that he's an inside player? As I have a feeling what's going to wind up happening is one of these two guys, and we'll talk about the two of them, and maybe we should create a special category just for these two guys. I think one of Chauncey Golston and Junior Fehoko will be an interior player, and one of them will be an edge player.
Mm-hmm. I think Fehoko is the edge player.
Okay,
I think he has the play style that lends itself more to rushing from space. He doesn't do as well rushing in tight spaces, in guard, whereas Golston has actually developed quite a bit of interior pass rush ability over his time in the NFL. So I think he definitely lends itself better. He just got to be a little bit more stout taking on double teams and stuff like that. But I definitely think Fehoko is the more edgy of the two. He can give you snaps on the inside if you need to be, but I think between those two, Chauncey Golston is more of the inside player, whereas Fehoko is more of the edge player.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense to me. There's a lot of chaos to Junior Fajoko's game, which a lot of times from the edge position can be productive and fun. A name that we have heard pop up over the course of the last couple of weeks that hadn't really popped up much at all before that was Tyrus Wheat, the undrafted free agent last year from Mississippi State. Was an edge player at Mississippi State, transitioned to play some linebacker type stuff for the Cowboys. Do we think that Zim is going to have a little bit more of a true Sam role in this defense? Because that, to me, feels like a perfect fit for a guy like this that's just going to sit out there at, I think he's like 265 pounds or something like that, and just bully 240-pound tight ends on the edge in the run game, and then be used a little bit as a rusher and maybe some country zone drops and things like that. Or do we think that he's do we think he's a true edge? Do we think he's a linebacker? Do we even think he winds up making this roster by the time we get to the end of it?
I personally don't think he's going to make the roster. I think he's another great practice squad candidate because like his ability to play off ball, his ability to play on the line of scrimmage, his size, those type of things make him a valuable and versatile rotational player to have on the practice squad. But we have heard, or at least I have heard from talking to people, that the Cowboys are going to have a more true Sam linebacker in the defense this year. And that is the kind of role where we could show some value and make an impact. But I just don't think the numbers on the defensive side are in his favor to be able to get to a point where he can get and see the field. It's just going to be hard with the guys in front of him. But I do think he's an interesting player, and he's someone to keep tabs on. And he's someone, with an injury, is someone who can see the field and kind of earn and develop into that kind of Sam linebacker role.
Yeah, I agree with you for sure. I think he's a practice squad guy. He's a guy that, we keep bringing up these kickoff rules. If you don't have to run 60 yards downfield to cover a kickoff, a 250, 260-pound guy that's pretty hard to move but moves well enough to play some off-ball linebacker for you, that feels like a pretty darn good candidate to line up in the interior part of the field on one of these, 10-yard head start kickoff situations and cause some chaos. But we will see. That is a name, I think, as of right now, he's a guy we got to consider probably a practice squad player. But he's one of those handful of guys that have the opportunity to play their way onto the roster. There's a handful of these guys, John Stevens, Jalen Brooks, Awesome Richards, even Nathan Brock Hoffman, maybe even Chuma Edoga have the chance. Matt Waletzko had the chance to play their way off the roster. He's got a chance to play his way onto the roster. I think right now he probably sits right off of it. He's got a chance to play his way on it. Would you agree?
Yeah, 100%.
Okay, so I think 5 edges is probably about where it winds up, considering they're going to go a little heavier at linebacker. So
this is where it gets scary.
Yeah, this is where it gets iffy for sure.
Frightening times.
Yep. And then I missed a letter.
Yeah, I
I
was
did.
gonna say, well, something happened on that one.
Yep. Okay. I get him and Vernon Golston's names mixed
Yeah.
up as to what all the H's and O's and U's are. Okay. So that's really it.
Justin Rogers,
Like,
I suppose, or big boy from Auburn.
yeah. But I mean, other than those guys,
Yeah, it's not great. I mean, I posted the screenshot on Twitter. Just like outside of Oso Digizua, does anybody on there, given what they gave last year, like provide you like hope for this year or optimism for this year? Like we all think Mozzie Smith has the ability to become a really good one tech nose tackle in the NFL, but is he going to be able to put on the size? Is he going to be able to make the adjustments necessary? How does going from one scheme to another affect his development? He's injured right now. He's dealing with I think a labrum repair, I believe.
yeah,
So
something with
how
the
much
shoulder, which is always great when you're trying to put mass on your upper body.
yeah, so it's
Always a
like
great thing to
all
do.
these things are like kind of we want him to take the step, but he has a lot of factors kind of going against his ability to take a developmental step this year. So we'll see how that kind of affects everything. But Chauncey Golson, I'd say we both agree he's more of a tweener than a someone you write home about as a 3 technique. Justin Rogers, we talked about him on the draft review pod. And Carl Davis is like the only other definitive defensive tackle on the roster. I just see this is a position they have to add someone in free agency. I don't see any other way they walk in the training camp with just these 4 or 5 guys and they're just like, yeah, here we go. We're gonna stop the run.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's where I have my big yellow block there that says TBD. Somebody has to be added to this depth chart, and this is kind of what we were talking about going into the draft, where when you don't do anything before the draft and free agency, and you count on the draft to meet all of your needs, you wind up not being able to get to everything, right? Especially when you make a pick like Marshawn Kneeland, who clearly he's going to be that edge 3, edge 4 type player there. He's going to play a lot for this team. But when you listed your positions of need, edge probably wasn't near the top, at least for 2024. And so when you make that pick in the second round, we're all excited about Marshawn Kneeland, but there are some downstream effects of that. And one of those is that you didn't get to interior defensive line until you got to Justin Rogers late in the draft. And so there's a spot in this interior defensive line depth chart that's not full yet, where they're going to have to add somebody. I think we both agree on that.
Please bring Calais Campbell.
Yes, somebody. I mean, Linval Joseph is still out there. He's got background with Zim. Like, even if you wait until August 31st rolls around and you sign Linval Joseph and he rolls into week 1 and just makes big chaos in the middle, because that's all that's some of these veteran guys want to do that and can do that, and especially if he's comfortable with the scheme and what he's asked to do, then great. It just creates more opportunity for Justin, for Rogers and for Carl Davis and all these other guys to get work during the season. Although I would love to have, this is one of the underrated things about having veterans around. I would love to have Linval Joseph around to have Mozzie Smith's ear for training camp and all that kind of stuff. But that's what they have coaches for. That's what Greg Ellis is for, and Paul Gunther and Mike Zimmer and all those guys. So we get to the linebacker spot. I can't, again, these names with multiple possible spellings. Okay. I want to put C's and K's and all that kind of stuff. So then I'm going to spell this one without any issue at all, because that makes sense. And then Damone Clark, right? We think he's going to make the team. And I'm just kind of rolling here. Let me know if you see something you disagree with or think there's something we need to add. Marist Lee.
LIU FAU.
There we go. And then what do we think? Do we think is there another linebacker that has to make this team?
I mean, especially with Marquise Bell moving back to safety, I don't think another one has to make the team. And honestly, I mean, when you look at the rest of them,
Buddy Johnson, Damian Wilson,
they
like,
don't look good. They don't
yeah,
look good. I mean,
yeah,
maybe Damian Wilson for the special teams thing. He's kind of built a niche for himself in the NFL. When he's been able to make a roster, it's been through special teams ability for the most part. So maybe I could see him maybe if he earns Fossil's love. But besides that, I don't love it. I don't love
yeah,
and here's the thing. It's like you have a guy like Micah Parsons as well, who is going to play some Sam linebacker in the Zim scheme. So technically, he's going to play like some quote unquote off the ball linebacker a little bit. He's going to moonlight as they move him around to try to create matchups and put him in the best position to produce on a snap by snap basis. So that kind of goes into it a little bit, and like you said, a guy like a Tyus Sweet, if he's on the practice squad, he's also kind of like a half edge, half linebacker type guy.
yeah.
So
I'm almost wondering if they may have Wheat penciled in as that last linebacker.
he could be. I could see it
Because
because especially when you
that
look at
feels
the
like not.
rest of the depth chart at linebacker. I mean, uh, Buddy Johnson doesn't do anything for me. Jason Johnson doesn't do anything. Brock Morganson or Mogensen, Damian Wilson doesn't do much for me.
Yeah, I think Tyrus Wheat probably features in right here. And that, then we're at 15 defensive players. That gives us room for 10 defensive backs. Even with our to be determined interior defensive lineman here, that gives us 15 defensive players. So let's play it out here. We'll highlight Tyrus Wheat, and we'll play it out and see if we've got room on the depth chart for him, or if maybe he's a practice squad call up for the first few weeks, a la Cooper Rush. So we go to corner. I think the first three guys, pretty obvious who those guys are going to be. Pending, there is the fact that, Stephon Gilmore is still out there, even though they seem to make it relatively clear they weren't all that interested in having him back earlier in the offseason. Again, the first year draft pick is going to make the team. And then it feels like you get into the world of all of we'll put CJ Goodwin on here.
Hey, no, I refuse to put him as a corner. He is a special
We'll
team.
put him on specialists. All right,
Yeah.
so we'll have 4 specialists. I love it.
I used to get so mad at Dallas Morning News, like I have to call this guy a corner. Why? Like I know he practices with them, but no, I refuse.
I love it. So then if we're into the Dan Quinn specials at the cornerback position, the Eric Scotts, the Nashawn Wrights. They did sign Josh DeBerry from A&M as an undrafted free agent. I think he's like at best, like if he plays out of his mind in training camp, he's probably a practice squad guy. So is this kind of a Nashawn Wright, Eric Scott battle to the death for the 5th cornerback spot?
That's what it kind of seems like it because they're both guys that kind of fit Dan Quinn's silo cover 3 man coverage system. And when you're playing a lot more quarters, a lot more split safety stuff, you're playing a bigger mix of off and press and doing all these different things that Zimmer likes to do. It's hard to say which one of them fits it better. I've kind of liked some of the things I've seen from Nashawn Wright in the past a little bit as a 5th cornerback on the roster type guy. But I think Eric Scott might be a slightly better fit maybe for Zim. I don't know because they both kind of they're both players that should be on the Commanders team in all honesty. Yeah. But I'll give Eric Scott the slight advantage right now, but it could really like that's one of the ones where it's a toss-up 50-50 either way. I could see it going either way. Or I could even see this is a place where they sign someone, after roster cuts or something like that. Just this back end of the cornerback, I could see it going a million different ways.
Yeah, they got so niche with that spot at the back end of the roster over the last couple of years. And like, I'm all for, hey, pick guys, sign guys that fit your scheme. But sometimes you get into these situations where um, sometimes it creates issues once you move on.
Mhm.
Where if you go that niche with those types of guys, especially if it's like a super niche scheme fit, like you
That
know all
honestly, this is why the Cowboys lack of moves in free agency didn't make much sense.
yeah
Usually when you see a change at the coordinator position, you see an influx of new talent for them to get their guys in for these, not necessarily just to be the starters, but to also to fill these depth roles, these cornerback 4 or 5,
yep
linebacker 4, defensive tackle 4, these type of positions that the Cowboys are really weak in right now in the transition. They didn't make the moves that normal teams make in those situations. So they're kind of in a tough spot right now. And everybody says after the draft, that's when they're going to make the signings to fill out these holes. But we're a couple weeks after and we still haven't seen it. Is it something that's still coming? We hopefully so, but as things stand right now, it's a little bit tough at those spots.
Yeah, I'm totally with you. I think Eric Scott is probably the more universally applicable cornerback than Nahshon Wright is. So I think leaning him is probably the better approach there. Because I think Nahshon is just I think he's so niche. Like he's so specific to what Dan Quinn wants to do. And even in that way, he struggled in the
Yeah.
NFL early in his career. So you're really hoping for like a massive jump forward in areas that he's not super comfortable being in for a guy like Nahshon Wright. Maybe there's a August the 1st trade for Nahshon Wright for a 2028 sixth round pick or something
Yeah.
like that to send him to Washington. All right, when we get to the safety position, this is a spot that you and I both feel pretty good about the depth, I think, and the ability of the guys that are there. The top two are pretty clear, right? Then I think Marquise Bell
Yep.
and Wanye Thomas both showed plenty in 2023 to make us think, okay, those guys are on the roster pretty clearly. Like those are pretty much those are very very clear to be the guys on the roster. This is where it gets interesting because now you have a guy like Israel Mukuamu, who I'm a huge fan of. I think he should have
I
gotten way
really
more
like
run last year.
100%.
But if we're keeping 4 specialists, if we're calling CJ Goodwin a specialist and we're keeping 4 specialists, we're out of room on the offense and the defense, which means maybe Tyrus Wheaton, maybe we say,
Well, you
okay,
still have the TBD there too as well.
right, yeah. So there's some roster spots here. The Nathan Thomas spot on offense, the Tyrus Wheat spot, and our TBD defensive tackle, because they very easily could sign Linval Joseph and just keep Justin Rogers on the practice squad. Like they could very easily do something like that. Do we think that let me ask you this. Is there any way you can picture in your mind that Israel Mukuamu isn't on this team in 2024?
Yeah, I can see it. Definitely
Yeah.
with changing of defensive coordinators, even though I do believe that Mukwamo is a type of safety that would fit Zimmer's scheme really well as a safety. I know he sees himself and also, maybe we were overthinking it. He sees himself as a corner. Maybe he's someone who can vie with Eric Scott for that 5th cornerback position. We don't know about that yet, potentially. But I would personally like to see him on the roster. He's a player I really like. We've talked about it a lot, so he can wear a lot of different hats for you, special teams and defensive wise. So I would want him to be on the roster, but it's just it's tough to fit him in because they're gonna keep CJ Goodwin in there. They see they point to his injury last year as a big reason why their coverage special teams went down the drain a little bit last year. I would say that's because they tried to ham fist the edge defender to be their gunner, but
Yeah, that was interesting.
Yeah, it was fun. It was fun
Yeah.
until he had to actually cover a punt until they actually returned it, and then it was like, oh, he can't stop. That's
Yeah, it was fun when it was the big scary guy running down the field, and they didn't want to return it because there was a 260-pound guy running down the field at him. And then once they realized, oh, he can't stop and he can't turn, all we have to do is take one step to the right or the left, and he'll run right by us. Once they did that, it became pretty clear that that it was an issue, and they just never pivoted. So
now here's
ahead.
my thoughts about the Ikwamu. It's going to be Israel Mukwamu versus Wheat, TBD, and Nathan Thomas.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And that's sort of what we talked about earlier. And it may even be, and John Stevens Jr. may be in that, especially if Brevin Spann-Ford has like a really good, if Luke Schoonmaker takes a step forward as a receiver in camp, Brevin Spann-Ford has a really solid camp. Maybe they say, hey, Tyrus Wheat's a better special teams player, or Izzy McCwamu is a better special teams player and will contribute more on defense than John Stevens Jr. will contribute on offense, because he's not going to be able to get through those top three tight ends. Or, this is where we do these by position. They're going to do this by position for the first 48 or so players, and then it's going to come down to what's the guy they don't want to lose, who's the guy they have more invested in, what's the guy that is at a more valuable position, all that kind of stuff. I think that is probably where the calculation comes down, and I think you're right. But I do think that they are more likely to be able to go into the season with these 4 linebackers than these 4 defensive tackles. And so I think if we're going to put Izzy McCwamu on the team because we think he's one of the best 49 position players on the team, I think we take it from the linebacker spot, not from the interior defensive line.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's smart. The only thing that I think of is if they add a defensive tackle, like you said, there's a good chance that defensive tackle just replaces one of the like the Justin Rogers, depending on who it is. It just depends on what kind of body they bring in. Like, say they bring in like a Calais Campbell, maybe he wouldn't replace a Justin Rogers because he's not a true nose. He's someone who can kind of moonlight a nose and primarily play in the B gaps or even the C gaps. So maybe that wouldn't, but if they sign like a Linval Joseph, I could see that just taking Justin Rogers' spot and them just keeping 4. So it kind of depends on what kind of defensive tackle they bring in. But I think, like you said, as we stand now, without knowing who it is, leaving that spot open to be a TBD is probably the smartest.
Yeah, absolutely. And Elazar, make him my nickel all day long. Make McCwamu my nickel all day long. With the size and the physicality, having played some safety and the physicality and the size, and having been in kind of the junk in their interior at safety, put him at corner, let him cover guys like he did at the end of 2022, and then be a part of the run fits and all that kind of stuff. I'm on board if you play him at nickel. I worry about him a little bit outside because just the speed and all that kind of stuff that guys play with out there, but inside, I'm all about it. All right. We got to our 53. I kind of sped through our Brian Anger, Brandon Aubrey, Trent Sieg, CJ Goodwin specialist area there. I don't think there's too much controversy in that situation.
Yeah, zero. Especially because they have no one backing up any of those spots.
Exactly. They're not using 90-man roster spots on any backups for those guys right now. So they're good to go there. So we got to our 25 offensive players. We only kept 2 quarterbacks. We're going to play the roster mechanism game with our guy Cooper Rush a little bit. 3 running backs, which feels light, but I think that maybe that's the chance that's what they go with. 4 tight ends. We went 6 wide receivers, which maybe that's heavy, but that's kind of the way that I lean towards them doing, especially after using another draft pick on a guy this year. We kept 10 offensive linemen, which feels heavy, but we know how much the guy who I look at and say, oh, well, this is the guy they can get rid of is Brock Hoffman. But that's the guy they won't get. That's the guy they're least likely to get rid of, right? That's the coach's pet. Exactly. So it feels like 10 offensive linemen is probably in the cards. Mm-hmm. We have 5 edges. We have 5 interior defensive linemen. One of those is player to be named later in the famous Major League Baseball trade. 4 linebackers, 5 corners, and 5 safeties. With Israel McCwamu providing a little bit of flex the other way. And we don't want this to happen much, but in a pinch in packages, Marquise Bell there's enough down in the box ability between Bell and Wilson and McCwamu that they can play second level defense with the guys that they have, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. So that's our 53-man roster. And I will ask you this question. I know my answer to this question, John. Is that 53-man roster better than the 53-man roster that they put on the field at AT&T Stadium against the Green Bay Packers in the wild card round of the playoffs and got washed off the field.
I don't think so. I mean, it's hard given who they lost, and if you look at the losses and who they brought in, I mean, it's really hard to argue that on paper the Cowboys are a better roster. But thankfully for us, games aren't played on paper, and we've seen teams in the past that got worse on paper but better in the win column the next year. And there's a lot of different things that go into it. Luck, bounces of the ball. There's a million different little intricacies that can change the outcome of a game on a week by week basis. So all hope is not lost. I feel like the negativity surrounding the Cowboys offseason has put a lot of fans like, are we not even going to make the playoffs this year? Are we going to be like in the doldrums of the NFL? And I think the Cowboys have too much talent at the top, especially with like Dak Prescott, CeeDee Lamb, Micah Parsons, Zach Martin. With that kind of talent, you're not going to be a team that's going to be bad.
I was going to say, as long as that guy right there is playing, you're going to win 10 games.
Yeah.
Like that sort of becomes your baseline. And then unlucky bounces might drop you down to 8 or 9 wins. Lucky bounces or really big developments from some of these guys that we have some uncertainty about might push you up to 11 or 12 games. But as long as that guy, number 4, is the quarterback of your team, you start your season at a 10-win baseline. And until that goes away, that's kind of where you start. So you can pencil, put this team in pencil to win that 10-ish games and be in the run for a wild card. And then whether you win the division or not really comes down to how does Philadelphia play, and is there like a big jump from a Washington or a New York to get in the way of 10 or so wins being enough to win the division.
Yeah, 100% agree.
Absolutely. All right, man. It is almost 1 o'clock Central. So I think we're going to call it a show. Guys, thanks so much again for joining us. Again, as usual, we are brought to you by Silver Moon Financial. If you are a business owner and you suck at accounting and you suck at QuickBooks, that's okay. Most business owners do. There's a link in the description to get your guide to QuickBooks Online that can help you get a little bit better. But if you want your business to be a lot better in that area, we can help you do that too. Slide in my DMs on Twitter. Go to the website. You can request a call there, silvermoonfinancial.com. We'll get you a call. We'll get you set up, and you will master your business finances. John, thanks so much, man. We will talk again on Tuesday.
Adios.